Okay. Welcome to Philosophy Roulette. I believe this is number 34. Not that it actually matters, because it is not the 34th episode, but hey, that's the number. Yeah. And where we grab let me see what we get in a random philosophy paper, and review it, and get my reaction as it happens. I have not read these papers before. I do not know what I'm going to get myself into. We were doing some analysis. Let's go back to thought, because they're at least of proper length. So. Okay. So we did some of these. Let's see. These are the. Let's see if we get the forthcoming ones. I'll have to build a thought. Oh, we did that. I already did one from Bent's already. Maybe I'll do that one later. We did this one. We did this. Did this. I wasn't gonna do a reply because did I do fundamental scrutability? I don't remember. Gabriel O'Graben, NYU Abu Dhabi. Well, if I can't do it, I won't do it. Well, I can't do it, so I won't do it. Okay. So. I would like to have done it. Accidental logical constants. Well, we'll take a look. If this is, as philosophy of logic and philosophical logic, I'm afraid that, I can't read it if there's too many symbols on the screen. It gets too convoluted for a podcast. So, I'm not going to do that. But I'd like to. Tristan Hayes has one of the best websites on the internet. If you have not checked it out, I mean, he doesn't post as much as I would enjoy, but it's always entertaining. Okay, we've got this one. So, the structure of essentialist explanations of necessity. Michael Wallner. If you are ever in the live chat and you want to grab the paper, all you gotta do is go to the chat room, type !point paper, and the link will pop back up. So you can follow along if you so choose. Alrighty. Download. Save. And there we are. Okay. I'm not going to read the abstract, just let's go. Fine, 94, Low 2008, Hale 2013, and others. Or argue or accept the view that necessity is to be explained by or grounded in essences. Yes, no, essence theory. Okay. So, did I say oh yeah, Essentialist. Okay. I was like, where did essences come from? Yeah, it's on Essential. Yeah, more coffee maybe. Alright. Necessity is to be explained or grounded in essences. Necessarily P, if and only if, and because there is some X whose essence ensures that P. Hale, however, believes that this strategy is not universally applicable. In particular, he argues that the necessity of essentialist truths cannot itself be explained by once again appealing to essentialist truths. It is for this reason that Hale holds there are basic necessities that are not and cannot be explained. Okay. So we've got a partition on the kind of things that are fundamental here. So there's necessities and then there's basic necessities. Any essentialist truth must itself be necessary, so this is a non-backwards Z, so this must be an essentialist X. X that is phi implies necessarily essential X. X that is phi. 2. The necessity of an essentialist truth like the essential X, X such as phi, cannot be explained by appealing once again to the essence of X on pain of vicious circularity. 3. The necessity of an essentialist truth like exist X, phi of X cannot be explained by appealing to the essences of other things, for that would 3.1 undermine the claim that X is true in virtue of X essences, and 2. Be viciously regressive. Yeah. 4. The necessity of an essentialist truth like essentialist X, phi of X cannot be explained in any other way. Okay. Because otherwise, then you wouldn't be talking about the essential thing. Okay. Oh, sorry. There's a 5. So the necessity of an essentialist truth like essential X, phi of X cannot be explained. 6. Hence, there are basic necessities that cannot be explained. So this is sort of paralleling a grounding argument, saying that there are ungrounded things, that some sort of, we were talking about grounding the other day, and if there's something that is like fundamental in the world, it has to be an unmoved mover, it's ungrounded, it just sort of doesn't rely on anything else. So this is sort of, it looks like a very similar sort of argument, but for essentialist truths. So, okay. Interestingly, Hale does not take this to be a shortcoming of essentialist explanations of necessity. No, and nor do the grounding people. They're like, well, that's what a ground is. It just grounds stuff. These essential things are just essential. That's what they are. Rather, he thinks thinks of this as evidence for a non-reductive interpretation of essentialism. He says, the point of the essentialist theory is not to provide a reductive explanation of any necessity. It is rather to locate a base class of necessities, those which directly reflect the nature of things, in terms of which the remainder may be explained. Okay, so these are the really important things. Wilsh, on the other hand, holds that essence of basic necessity would be a problem for essentialism. On his account, Hale's style essentialism would fall short of what he calls explanation challenge for the metaphysics of necessity. We must accommodate explanations of necessity truths through sources and avoid unexplained necessity truths. In this paper, I wish to remain silent on the question of whether basic necessity should at all costs be avoided. Also, I do not intend to argue that essentialism can in principle avoid basic necessity. My goal is more modest. I'm always worried about that. Like, I've tried to say stuff like saying more modest here. It usually, I don't know. It's because I was saying it because I was afraid of what I was, of what the reviewers were gonna say. They're like, well, you're trying to do crazy things. I'm like, well, no, I'm not trying to do crazy things. I'm trying to do reasonable things. But like, I'm not entirely certain of what this, the rhetorical use of saying what you're doing is modest is. I mean, is it hand wavy? Is it just trying to keep people? I think what I was trying to do is I was trying to keep people from making wild accusations of what was going on. I was trying to like pump the brakes, slow yourself down a little bit. This is all I'm trying to do here. Because if you start off sort of like talking about big things up here, you have to make sure your audience doesn't get ahead of you. So you have to be careful when writing, and this is sort of. But the question is who's it more for? Is it really because you are not going to do something crazy, or is it because you are going to do something crazy and you're trying to cloak it in non-crazy? We'll find out. What I wish to show is that Hale's argument for basic necessities fails because it rests on a misunderstanding of the structure of essentialist explanations of necessity. See, that's the question. Is this just a failure of Hale's argument, or is this structure of essentialist explanation of necessity really a big thing that is trying to be snuck in? It doesn't matter. In particular, I shall demonstrate how a clarification of this misunderstanding leads to a refutation of premises 2, section 2, and 3 in sections 3-4. Hale's worried that appealing to iterated essentiality claims undermines the initial essentiality claim, or renders the explanation of necessity viciously circular or regressive is unfounded. While there might be different reasons to refrain from appealing to iterated essentiality claims or different reasons to accept basic necessities, there is a valuable lesson to be learned from the failure of Hale's argument. Some of the crucial circularity and regress arguments that have been championed in the debate about essentialism need to be re-evaluated. Two more things need to be said in advance. I will not take issue with premise 1. Hale makes an intuitive case for one, which is very plausible. Nothing could fail to have the essence it has, that is, if X is essentially phi, it is necessary that it is essentially phi. Okay, so yeah, if you say something is necessarily one way, essentially, then you can add a box in front of that. Well, interestingly, this is a non-subscripted box, though. This is just... Alright, so whatever, we're assuming that for the course of this argument. So even if a subscripted box you can put as many non-subscripted boxes. You can put a non-subscripted box in front of a subscripted box. Okay. Also, I will grant premise 4, granting 4 amounts to staying in the essentialist framework according to which only essences are ever sources of necessity. Hence, the success of Hale's argument for basic necessity is premised on the essentialist claim that only essences can serve as metaphysical sources of necessity. Okay, that's fine. If you really like, these are just the setup for what author wants to do. Premise 2. Premise 2 claims that explaining the necessity of essential phi of x, that is, explaining the necessity of the essential phi of x by the fact that it's essential that x is phi, would be viciously circular. It can be easily shown, however, that this is not the case. Take the following list of necessity, truth, and essentialities. Necessarily phi of x. Essential x is phi of x. Necessary essential x phi of x. Essential x phi of x. Necessary essential x phi of x, and then you keep on going with essential x phi of x. 7 is explained. So 7 is just necessary of some property by 8. So okay. So 7 is explained by 8. So up here you can turn an essential x into a necessary, because that was the assumption from above. 9 is explained by 10. So yeah, so if you can keep iterating on the essentials, then you can keep getting a modal box in front of your, you can keep replacing essential x with a modal box. Note that this is not a chain of explanations. It is not claimed that the explanation 8, 10, 12 are themselves explained by a later step. Yeah, these are just, if you have this, then you can get this. Okay. The series of explanations would be circular only if 8 were reducible to 7. So if you could go the other way. It says you can't go the other way. 10 to 9, 12 to 11, and so on. But the whole point of Fein's, Lowe's, and Hale's brand of essentialism is that essential x, phi of x, is not reducible to necessity of phi of x. That is, essences is not reduced to modality. Okay, there is no circularity involved. Essentialist is not reducible. It does reduce to, but it's not reducible to. So you can't it's not a conversion back and forth. It's a one-way conversion from essence to necessity. Of course, there is a circular explanation in the vicinity. Suppose someone asks why a specific essentialist truth holds. For example, why containing Socrates as a member lies in the very nature of the singleton of Socrates. Fein's classic example. This is the third time I've read that in the last few days. Seems to be popular. This question would prompt a slightly confused reaction and seem to be answerable only by reiteration of the very essentialist fact. Well, it is just part of what singleton Socrates, that it contains Socrates as a member. The fact that there only seems to be a circular explanation of an essentialist fact like essential x phi of x indicates that, as Glaser puts it, we have reached the end of the explanatory road. It is indeed the case that we hit bedrock once we come to essentialist truth, in the sense that essentialist truths admit no further explanation. The point here, however, is that this does not entail the necessity of essentialist truths. That this does not entail that the necessity of essentialist truths do not admit of any further explanation. Note that what is at stake in premise 2 is not whether essentialist truths can be explained, but whether their necessity can. And while the question why the singleton Socrates essentially contains Socrates would make us wonder whether the interlocutor has misunderstood the relevant notions, the question why this essentialist proposition holds as a matter of necessity does not seem to prompt the same confused reaction. It rather seems to be a perfectly legitimate question to ask. I dismiss premise 2 as false, since the mere appeal to the essentialist 5x in the explanation of the necessity of 5x is not circular. Note, however, that even though there is no structural or syntactic problem with this explanation, no circularity, there might be a metaphysical problem. If we take the notion of essence at play here to be the constitutive essence of x, it looks like that iterated essentially claims like essential x 5x are simply false. If we take the constitutive essence of x to express x in its most core respects, it is unlikely that the immediate constitutive essence of x contains information about the constitutive essence of x. So even though 2 is wrong, the appeal to the essence of x in the explanation of necessarily x might be blocked. Necessarily essential x 5x might be blocked for a different reason than Hale thinks. Okay, so let's go look at 2 real fast again, just to remind myself. The necessity of an essentialist truth like essential 5x cannot be explained once again by appealing once again to the essence of x on pain of vicious circularity. Okay, so the necessity follows from this, and that can explain it, but then the necessity is something different from this, and so there is no circularity. It's not, so there's no vicious circularity there, even though it looks sort of circular because this is where the explanation ends, but that's just where the explanation ends. It isn't a circularity problem, it's just an ending the explanation problem. So the necessity does not admit of any further explanation. The necessity could get further explanation, but the essential one part doesn't. So it's like you've got this essential part that you don't talk about anymore, but you could still talk about what the problem, why the essentialist truth has, what else is the necessity. Alright, so again, we'll have to see what the metaphysical concern is that is being here, because I don't quite know what the difference between essence and necessity is in this under these conceptions. I mean, I haven't read the references, so I don't quite understand how these different notions are being used other than just that E implies box. That's it. I mean, that's all it seems to be doing here. E implies box, box does not, it's only one direction, box does not imply E, and then so as long as you're not talking about the E directly, you're only talking about the box. You can keep asking about what is grounding, what further explanations about the box you want. But since E goes to box, and you also can't necessarily string the E's together like this, just you don't keep getting that as you well, can you keep stringing E's together? Nah, see, there's a whole thing. Alright, we have to keep going, I'm sorry. I'm just, there might be some, the iterated essentiality claims. See, the thing about if you could iterate, there might be an issue, but it is likely that the iterated logic is simply false. And so, since you don't get the iterations on this, there would probably be issues there too, but I'm sorry, I'll keep going. Yeah, iterations do funny things when you're dealing with logic. Alright, premise 3.1. Let's go back. 3.1 was, sorry about this, undermine the claim that 5x is true in virtue of x's essences. Okay. It is difficult to grasp Hale's point in what I call his understanding claim in 3.1. Appealing to the essence of an entity different from X in the explanation of a necessity of essential X5X undermines the claim that essential X5X. I take it that Hale claims undermine the claim for he holds the following claim BI to be true. BI. The modal status, that is, the necessity of essential X5X, is built into the relevant essence, i.e. the essence of X. I think Hale believes undermining to follow from BI, built into-ness. Appealing to the essence of an entity different from X in the explanation of the necessity of essential X5X undermines the essentialist claim with its built-into modal status. What does built-into-ness mean? I think Hale's reasoning is that rather than each essentialist proposition require an explanation for its necessity, it should be regarded as part of what essences are that they hold by necessity. Note, however, that the second part of the last sentence sounds a lot like explanation of the necessity of the essential phi of X. In fact, it sounds like an essentialist explanation of the necessity of essentialist propositions. After all, it is part of what essences are that they hold by necessity. It might be read as a claim that it is essential to essences that essentialist propositions are themselves necessary. On this reading, built-into-ness does not entail underminingness. That is to say, built-into-ness cannot be taken as evidence for the fact that appealing to the essence of an entity different from X in the explanation of essential X5X undermines the claim that essential X5X. Rather, built-into-ness simply constrains a pretty straightforward essentialist explanation of the necessity of essentialist truths in terms of essence. Given that the initial X in the essential X5X does not stand for essences themselves, the essentialist explanation of the necessity of essential X5X that is entailed by the built-into claim appeals to the essence of an entity different from X. This reading of built-into-ness not only blocks the inference to undermining, it even provides a counterexample to undermining. So this reading of built-into-ness allows me to reject 3.1. Okay, a lot of fun things for me to read right there. Yeah, because so you can avoid the circularity depending on how you slice. This is basically what's going on here. You do not need to, you can turn the essence of essence, but that's a different thing than what was being said. Yeah, I mean, it's an essence different from X. The built-into-ness appeals to the essence of an entity different from X. So this is not the target of the built-into-ness is not what the original author thought. It can be a different target, and if it's a different target, then it completely undermines itself. So it completely undermines on the undermining problem. So yeah, it blocks the undermining problem, and then you can reject the 3.1, which the OP here. Michael Wallner wants to do. What speaks in favor of my reading of built-into-ness is that I do not have to assume a non-essentialist characterization of what some X is. The proponent of what I presume to be Hale's reading of built-into-ness has to make sense of the question of what essences are in non-essentialist terms, thereby assuming extra, presumably primitive ideology. Note, however, that my reading presupposes that we can make some sense of essences of essences. Yeah, this is what the if you can make sense of this, then you have an alternate target for the built-into-ness, and that's what does the work. Yet Lowe argues that essences cannot themselves have essences, for that would result in a vicious infinite regress. If Lowe is right, built-into-ness cannot be interpreted in terms of the essences of essences against my case, and my case against 3.1 is void. So I need to resist Lowe's regress argument against essences of essences. Luckily, there is a compelling case against Lowe's argument in the recent literature. Spinelli argues that the regress Lowe fears sets off if we allow for essences to have essence is not a vicious one. In order to see his point, we have to get clear on the theory of infinite regress arguments in general. Okay, so we're going slightly, I guess this might be a slight aside, or are we going to do that? Yeah, no, we're going to do it. Wieland, no idea, distinguishes between two different theories of infinite regress arguments, the paradox theory and the failure theory. According to the paradox theory, the crucial premise of an infinite regress argument is shown to have regressive consequences that are paradoxical because they conflict with the independent considerations such that the crucial premise has to be rejected, much like in a reductio ad absurdum. Take the following example. The crucial premise that each one of our beliefs depends upon some further belief for being justified has regressive consequences that are paradoxical because they conflict with the independent consideration that there's at least one justified belief. I'm sorry, these are long sentences. I'm sort of losing track of them when I'm reading. The crucial point that each one of our beliefs depend upon some further belief for being justified has a regressive consequence that are paradoxical because they conflict with the independent consideration that there's at least one justified belief. Okay, so yeah, so if everything is belief, you have to have a justification, but if they're all relying on each other, then it's circular, and so it sort of knocks out the whole point of having justified beliefs if you're making them infinitely circular. Note that this account of infinite regress arguments. On this account of infinite regress arguments, the independent considerations, in this case the assumption that there is at least one justified belief, have to be argued for separately. This is not the case on the failure theory. According to the failure theory, the purpose of an infinite regress argument is not to refute a proposition, that is the crucial premise like the paradox theory, but rather to show that certain solutions to a problem fail because they get stuck in a regress problem that must be solved in order to solve the case. So in the initial one, so it's sort of like it's a red herring, you get pulled off on the failure theory. And in the paradox theory, it's like what you wanted to begin with is not where you could possibly end up. So you've contradicted yourself like a reductio. Okay. Let's see what, Let's see what more about the failure theory. Take again the following example. Suppose the problem you are seeking to solve is to explain how a belief can be justified. The alleged solution would be the claim that each one of our beliefs depend on some further belief for being justified. Since it is clear that only a belief that is itself justified can justify another belief, the solution to the initial problem fails if for you would have to solve the infinitely many similar problems prior to the initial one. Okay, so instead of by there being infinite many beliefs, like making it ridiculous that you actually have a justified belief, it would mean that if you wanted to justify a belief, you'd have to solve an infinite problem. Okay. Note that the regress arguments on the failure theory are dialectically stronger than the regress arguments on the paradox theory. This is because if we take failure instead of paradox as criterion for viciousness, we do not need to show that the regressive consequences of the crucial premise are paradoxical or unacceptable for other reasons. It depends how you slice this. I mean, some people really like a contradiction, and if you don't have that, then it's like, well, saying you have to solve an infinite problem, well, sometimes they're like limits. You can say, well, I've reached a limit, and yeah, it will go on forever, but it's pragmatically not so bad. So I'm not entirely, I'd have to look up more about what these things say. The failure theory is like, well, yeah, it's like the limit never reaches zero, but it gets so small that it's unimportant now. So, I'm sure they've covered this sort of thing. This is the sort of thing they would cover. It is because regress arguments on the failure theory are in this sense self-sufficient that Spinelli takes it to follow from the considerations of charity that whenever it is not clear how a regress argument we are planning to criticize is to be construed, if possible, we should construe it according to failure theory. That's fair. Like, it is a simpler thing to get set up. So here is Lowe's regress construed according to the failure theory. If essences are themselves entities with essences, then what metaphysically determines what X is another entity, Y, the essence of X. What metaphysically determines Y, the essence of X, is yet another Z, the essence of X, and so on ad infinitum. Failure. The task of determining what X is cannot be completed. For such a completion will require infinitely many similar tasks to be completed first. According to Lowe, if essences have themselves essences, the essence of X fails to determine what X is because infinitely many similar tasks of determination would have to be completed prior to the initial task for it to be achieved. However, Spinelli makes a convincing case that there is no such failure involved here, and hence the ensuing regress is not vicious. His argument depends on what he calls the relevance principle and finds 9590AB distinction between immediate and immediate essences. Okay, we've got immediate and immediate essences. Relevance principle. Whatever belongs to the essence of an entity has to be relevant to the question of what the entity is. Immediate essence. The immediate essence of X only includes what has to be a direct bearing on the question as to what X is. Immediate essence. The immediate essence of an entity is the immediate essence of X has only an indirect bearing on what X is, and hence only in the immediate essence of X. The immediate essence only includes what has to be direct bearing, and so the immediate is indirect bearing. Okay, so I think this is exactly what I was saying. You're gonna have the initial essence is the big one, and then after that you're gonna get more and more indirect. So it's gonna get smaller and smaller what the relevance is, and therefore smaller and smaller, and therefore it won't be a problem after a while. All right, so find 95, page 61 introduces the distinction between immediate and immediate essence with the help of the following example. It is essential to the singleton of Socrates to contain Socrates. It is essential to Socrates to be a man. Now do F1 and F2 and tell that it is essential for singleton Socrates to contain a man. Finds the answer is that on the immediate conception of essential, that's immediate, not immediate, it does. On the immediate, it does not. It is clear from this distinction between immediate and immediate essence that the latter, but not the former, is subject to chaining. Against the background of the relevant principle, we can take the immediate essence of some entity X to contain all and only those things that are directly relevant to X. Okay, this is smarter than what I said, because Find doesn't even bother to take the limit. He just figured out a way to cut off what immediately after the first step. Leave it to Kid Find. He's clever. Okay. To see Spinelli's response to Lowe's regress argument against the possibility of essences, it is important to clearly see the crucial task. Okay, so it looks like so they're just going to solve the problem assuming this stuff. I mean, I'm going to assume that assuming this stuff is like cool, but it just looks like they're like, okay, look, we're just going to go with immediate and immediate essences, and that's going to solve our problem. Okay, so to see Spinelli's response to Lowe's regress argument against the possibility of essences, it is important to see the crucial task with regard to which there is alleged failure when we allow for essence to themselves have essences. The crucial task is to determine what X is essentially. According to the relevance principle and immediate essence, there is no failure with regard to his task. Yes, according to them. I'm not entirely on board with the relevance principle, because I don't really... How do you actually tell which essence is relevant? That looks like this could be you'd have a circularity issue when it comes to figuring out what a relevant essence is, or what essence is relevant. So yeah, there could be some questions in that area. We take as the immediate essence. There is no failure with regard to this task if, as I think is plausible, we take Y as the immediate essence of X. Y contains all that is directly relevant for X and is thus able to determine what X is in this direct sense without any other task further down the infinite list being completed first. This is because the question of what Y, the essence of X itself is, the question of essence of X, it has no direct bearing on what X is. So if we are dealing with immediate essences, L3 is rendered wrong. There is no crucial failure, and Lowe's regress is not vicious. Yeah, but I think you're just gonna replicate the problem when you try to define relevance. But that's fine. Problem for another day. Let's take stock. If Spinelli's response to Lowe's regress argument is sound, there is no structural reason that we cannot make sense of the essence of essence. So I have what is necessary to advance my reading of BI, built into this thingy, on the ground on which I reject the undermining principle and 3.1. Alright, so this is not a bad argument. I'm just a little uncertain about some of the references some of the principles getting used to block the regress. According to 3.2, the necessity of essential X, 5X, cannot be explained by appealing to the essence of Y, where Y is not equal to X, because this would lead into a vicious regress. I think the regress Hale has in mind here is crucially different from Lowe's essence regress that I've just discussed. I take it that Hale is concerned with the following issue here. If we explain necessarily essential x 5x by essential y, essential x 5x, the latter is an essentialist claim and will, Pache 1, be itself. Why do we not italicize Pache or pace? I think we should, because pace, I mean, it would just a complete aside. Pache, I mean, pace is a word in English, and so the fact that it's not italicized is slightly annoying, and it's not used very much, so it's not like ad hoc where, I mean, AD is actually not really a word. I mean, maybe it is, but it's used enough that you see it, but Pache is not, so I just like it if people italicize Pache. Pache 1, be itself necessary. So we get necessary essential y, essential x, 5x, which would in turn be explained by essential z, essential y, essential x, 5x, which in turn would be necessary, and so on. This means we get the following list of essential truths, where we're, again, with a similar thing, we're able to replace boxes with the essential quantifier, I guess you could call it. But in this case, they are subscripted quantifiers, and you're losing the subscript when you're converting into the box, which is interesting. Okay, so 13 is explained by 14, 14 by 15 by 16, and so on. It is clear that explaining the necessity of essential x 5x by appeal to the essence of entities different from x will give rise to infinitely many necessity truths, to infinitely many essentialist truths, and so infinitely many essentialist explanations of necessities. The question, however, is whether this really leads to a vicious infinite regress. I mean, yeah, I mean, normally you can keep adding boxes to things and whatnot. But is that bad? For reasons I've outlined in section 3, I will again base my considerations on the failure theory, according to which the viciousness of a regress depends on whether or not there is explanatory failure. Note that the crucial task here is to explain the necessity of essential x 5x, that is to explain 13. Yeah, if you can explain the base case, that's all that's really critical here. This explanatory task would fail if the explanation would depend on the prior completion of infinitely many similar explanatory tasks. Yeah, this as can be shown, however, is not the case. Like, why is that not the case? Explanatory test would fail if the explanation would depend on the prior completion of infinitely. Oh yeah, sure. Sorry, this is just a failure principle. This, as can be shown, however, is not the case. Structurally, the task of explaining 13 is completed once we allude to 14 as its explanans. Crucially, it is not claimed that 14 itself is explained in anything further down the list. Yeah, they aren't inherently chained together. They're just in the list together because they look that way, but you don't have to put them in that list, and then it's just floating out there. 14 can just be floating out in the third realm, and then once you get 14, you've got 13 and you're happy. 14 is an essentialist proposition, and hence it is likely that it does not admit of any further explanation, as I've discussed in 2. What is this likely does not? Alright, whatever. I mean, I don't know, there's something funny right. Maybe it's just I don't like the phrasing of the sentence. It is also important to note that 15 is neither identical nor reducible to 14. Yeah. Put differently, explain the necessity of essentialist x 5x by alluding to an essence of an entity different from x takes the structural form of an infinite series of essentialist propositions, not that of an infinite descending chain of explanations. Only the latter structure would result in explanatory failure and constitute a vicious infinite regress. I don't know about that. I mean, it isn't the same one you were talking about before, but maybe there would be a different one. But yeah, I'll take the author's word for it now. I mean, an infinite series is, yeah, well, I mean, this infinite series could have different problems than an infinitely descending chain. I mean, the problems we were talking about are infinitely descending chains, and infinite series is a different thing. Only in the latter structure would result in explanatory failure and constitute a vicious infinite regress. Yeah, but there might be some different problem. There are 3 things that, I'm sorry, I'm just being curmudgeon-y. There are 3 things that make it the case that we are not dealing with an explanatory chain here. A. 14 is neither identical with nor reducible to 15. 16 is neither identical with nor reducible to 17, and so on. B. It is not claimed that any of the exponentia 14, 60 are themselves explained by anything further down the list. 14 suffices to explain 13, that is to say 14, that is to say it is 14 and not 15 that explains 13. Okay. Yes, it's like you can explain one thing but you have to stop talking at that point. It's like just shut up. And then you're okay. But if you start digging deep, you could get yourself into trouble. But it's like, as long as you don't look under so as long as you don't look, it won't be a problem. It's like yeah. It's like, just don't poke the bear. Just don't do it. It is constitutive of essentialist theories of the Finian, Lowian, and Hallian brand. B stems from the fact that essentialist truths do not admit of further explanations, and C has to do with what Hale calls the non-transmissiveness of essentialist explanations of necessity. Okay, so there is like a claim on like the non-poking the bear issue. Like, don't look under the rock, don't peek behind the curtain. Taste but don't look but don't taste. Look but don't touch. Hale holds that whatever the exponans of the necessity of P is, it must itself be necessary. Yet it is only in a transmissive explanation of the necessity of P that the necessity of the exponans plays an explanatory role. In a non-transmissive explanation of the necessity of P is merely the truth of the exponans that explains the explanandum, not its necessity, even though the exponans might indeed be necessary. This is again a double speak sort of thing. It's like, this is what explains this, but it's not necessary. But it might also be necessary, but we're not talking about that right now. It can easily be seen that an essentialist explanation of necessity is indeed non-transmissive. The necessity of the exponans is that is the necessity of the essentialist proposition does not play an explanatory role. Yeah, it doesn't have to be necessary. It just has to explain something. The necessity isn't what's doing the work at that time. Put differently, even though essentialist 5x is indeed necessary, it is essentially 5x. It is rather than necessity essentialist 5x that explains the necessity 5x. It is because of the non-transmissiveness of essentialist explanations of necessity that the task of explaining the necessity essentialist x 5x by appeal to an essentialist claim like essentialist y, essentialist x, 5x is completed at each step. Yeah. So, yeah, it's basically saying you can't jump from this one to this one here. Like, you can't make this jump from this thing to this thing. It's only this one here that is explaining this one. Like, this is an important step, and so if you can't get to this thing here, then you shouldn't talk about this one. And from over here, you can't get the you have to, like, this thing does not imply that one without the further step. So it's maybe there's a transitivity thing here that we could that might be interesting to look at. Like if this implies this and this implies that, then does this imply that? But it's an explanation issue here, and so in some sense, yeah, there's a transitivity of explanation. So there might be something else going on when it comes to moving from the box essential x to just the box phi. Okay. This avoids the chain-like structure of essentialist transitivity. This avoids the chain-like structure of essentialist explanations of necessity and thereby avoids explanatory failure, which is why the explaining strategy in premise 3 is not viciously regressive. Again, we can admit that this strategy creates infinitely many essentialist facts and hence infinitely many necessities and thereby infinitely many essentialist explanations of necessities. This is hardly problematic, however, since it is likely that we have infinitely many explanations of necessities, even on a position like Hale's, that allow for unexplained necessities. Even if some necessities are unexplained, it is likely that those are in need of explanation those that are in need of explanation are still infinitely many. Summing up, the point is that having infinitely many explanations does not entail that any of them are viciously regressive. So I come to reject 3.2 as well. Conclusion. My goal was to shed light on the structure of essentialist explanation of necessity by criticizing Hale's argument for basic necessities. First, I argued that premise 2 has to be rejected since explaining the necessity of essentialist x, 5x, by appealing once again to the essence of x does not yield a circular explanatory structure. Taking note of a different reason to doubt the plausibility of iterated essentiality claims like essentialist x, 5x, I move on to premise 3. 3.1 was dismissed on the grounds of my reading of the claim that the modal status of essence is built into the very idea of essence. I cleared the path for this by reading of this for the string by appealing to Spinelli's argument against Lowe's rejection of essences of essences. Concerning 3.2, I showed that explaining the necessity of essentialist x, 5x by appealing to the essence of an object different from x does not yield a vicious regressive explanatory structure. If my criticism is sound, Hale's argument does not succeed in establishing the need for unexplained basic necessities. None of the premises in Hale's argument provides reason to think that essentialism cannot meet Wilsh's EC. I don't remember what EC is, but not important right now. It doesn't. The lesson to be learned concerning the structure of essentialist explanations of necessity is that employing iterated essentiality claims in essentialist explanations of necessity does not eo ipso entail a vicious circle or regress. It is, however, an open question as to whether there are different reasons to refrain from appealing to iterated essentiality claims. This is a question for another paper, though. Yes, that's a good point. Because that's the iterated problem is a different problem than the what I was complaining about over here. Okay. Yeah, so not bad. It is a nice paper. There's a bunch of concepts going on that are working together here, and you have to be able to have a background in all of them to really dig your teeth into this sort of stuff. But I mean, it makes sense. If you're looking to block sort of these vicious regresses and circularities, and it looks like this right here, by being able to this one-way reduction from essential to the box, so you're losing the particularity of the essential essence to the just the generic box. Is doing a bunch of work, so that seems like the innovation in this paper. So we'll, depending on how you buy that argument or that how that is spelled out, is how much you're going to appreciate the conclusion of this paper. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you very much. If you have any suggestions on what to do, what I should review next, or any other comments, you can leave it in the chat, and I'll probably see it, or maybe not. But send me a message, and yep, that's it for now, and I hope you have a good day. Stay safe, everybody. Bye.